and welcome to the Ellen Made Book Club. Today I'm gonna go through my reading statistics from 2024. I might have gone a little bit overboard considering the fact that I read 50 books last year and not like 1,000, but I've done all the things now. I've pulled all of the statistics and made all the graphics and all of that, so we're just past the point of no return and we're doing it. And if you like and enjoy reading statistics and graphics and all of that, you've come to the right place. So maybe grab a snack and something to drink because this is gonna take a while. I'm gonna start by showing you my reading year month by month and just show you the books that I read and any sort of highlights or takeaways. And then I'm going to get into my reading statistics for 2024, and that's going to be books and pages and publication year, genres and themes, series versus standalones, group reads, format acquisition, my spending, and my rating of books. And I'm also going to look at the authors that I read from and do a bit of a diversity check. I'm doing a diversity reading challenge for 2025, and the statistics from 2024 definitely inspired me to do that challenge. Spoiler, it doesn't look fantastic, but you know, it's good to at least know where you're standing. So we're gonna look at male or female authors. That's all of the information I have. If anybody identifies as anything other than that, I'm not aware of it, so I'm going with male or female. I'm also gonna look at white authors versus BIPOC authors. And I also want to look at the geography of my books and authors, both in terms of setting and in terms of where the authors are from and where they live and all of that kind of thing. And I'm also going to look at the authors that I read the most from. So starting with my reading year, in January I finished one book, that was Circe by Madeline Miller, and I started that in 2023, and that's all that I read. In February I finished 3 books, and I also posted my very first Booktube video on February 4th. So this is when I started my Booktube channel, and that was definitely a highlight and a very good decision on my part. In March, I finished 7 books. This was a great reading month for me. I also participated in my first ever Booktube event, which was March Mystery Madness. And so I read The Maid, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and The Maidens. And I also discovered audiobooks and started a subscription for that. And I had a really good time and a really good reading month. I listened to Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Stone Blind, and Yellowface. I also bought a bunch of new books, and I did my first proper book haul and unboxing, and that was very exciting. And from that I read The Maiden by Kate Foster, which I also really enjoyed. April was the first month that I used my TBR jar to decide what books to read, and I was very excited, and I had made all of the prompts myself, and these are the books that I had picked from that. I think I had a prompt for memoir, and so that's why I chose Sociopath by Patrick Gagney, and that sort of coincided with the People April event, which is, to read memoirs and biographies. So I kind of participated in that a little bit. The other ones were just for fun and just based on the prompts that I had pulled from my brand new TBR jar. May was the first month of the book club that I've had on my channel. And I started out very strong with 3 books a month, which turned out to be a little much, but anyways, that's where we started. I read The Bandit Queens, Stolen, and Before the Coffee Gets Cold for the book club. And then there was also the Asian readathon, and so that's how The Bandit Queens and Before the Coffee Gets Cold and Only This Beautiful Moment were chosen. There was a lot of overlap, and I was trying to figure out how to match the prompts that I pulled from my TBR jar and the book club, and there was also Horror Mayhem going on, so I had a book for that, but I didn't finish that until June. And then there was also Mental Health May, which I really wanted to participate in, and I had 2 books for that, but they turned out to not be very good choices, so I DNF'd those. But yeah, anyways, in May I read 4 books. In June, I finished Marina for the Horror Mayhem event, and it also turned out that Maria Andrea from Books and Bocadillos was also reading that, but that was my very first buddy read, and we didn't have a lot of like communication during our reading, but it was still very nice to have read it like at the same time as somebody else, and we could discuss it in the comments and things like that. It just made me connect a bit more with her, and so we're very good Booktube friends now. And yeah, that was still like a good memory of mine. And I also continued to read 3 books for the book club. So I read The Wager, Piranesi, and As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow for the book club, and did a combined like book club discussion for those 3. In July, we're continuing with 3 books for the book club, and those were 1984, A Man Called Ove, and Parable of the Sower. And then I also had a buddy read with Kat at Curious Cat, because again, we were kind of accidentally reading a book at the same time. This is How We Lose the Time War. And we were both kind of struggling with it. We just decided to help each other out. I was listening to it on audiobook and I was so confused, but then I got one from the library and we could try to help each other figure out what was even going on. That was a really interesting reading month as well. In August, I only had 2 books for book club. We read The Song of Achilles and Pachenko. And then I also continued the Earth Seed series with Parable of the Talents, which was a buddy read with Kat at Curious Cat and Chelsea at Libraries and Lattes. And yeah, that book is intense, but I really enjoyed having the discussions with Kat and Chelsea. And yeah, that was a fun time. And then I also read One Little Lie as a kind of light-hearted palate cleanser in between. So yeah, that was good. I also did my first reading challenge vlog, which you can go back and watch. I was trying to finish my big books for Big Book Summer. I will link that below and you can go see how that went. In September, I had 3 books again for the book club, and those were The Power, Clytemnestra, and The Mercies. I ended up DNFing The Mercies because there were elements of witch hunt in there, and I had been burned from the burnings, so I didn't want to read that. And then I had a buddy read with Kat again at Curious Cat, and that was The Center. In October, I think I had noticed a bit of burnout from reading so many books for book club, and also a lot of heavy reads and heavy topics like dystopias and things. And so I decided to not have so many like group reads in October and only do 2 books for book club. And those were Beartown and Remarkably Bright Creatures. And that was a very good choice, I think, because in October I read 7 books, allowing myself to mood read a little bit more and just pick up whatever books I wanted to just for fun. Proved to be a very good strategy for me to read more books and enjoy myself a bit more. And not that the book club isn't enjoyable, but there is kind of that pressure to finish the book and go on to have a discussion about it. I also read Rewitched by Lucy Wood, which was an anticipated book for me because I've been following her channel, and that came out in September, and so I was very excited about that. And I also did a scavenger hunt video and read The Lost Apothecary and continued the Prison Healer series that I had started in the spring because I wanted to finish that before the end of the year. So yeah, October was a really good reading month for me. November was another good reading month for me. I only had 1 book club read, and that was Us Against You, which is the second part in the Beartown series. And then I also continued with The Blood Trader for the Prison Healer series to finish that. And then I read I Who Have Never Known Men, which I loved, and Bird Eye, which was a new release that I had been wanting to pick up as well. And then I had 2 short stories, The Yellow Wallpaper and The Answer Is No. And so overall, I had a really good reading month in November in terms of the books that I had finished. I also wanted to participate in Neurovember, which was a reading event by Kat at Curious Cat. And I had picked out so many interesting books for that, but the ones that I started were just not really doing it for me. But if you're interested in reading some sort of intersectional books relating to neurodiversity and mental health and the brain and all of that, I picked out a lot of interesting books. So I will link the video where I talk about them, and you can pick any one of those to read. In December, I had one book club read, which was The Winners, but I also read The Mare, Home is Where the Lies Live, and One Dark Window. And I also read the majority of Crooked Plow, and I read a bit in White Cat, Black Dog, and I also started Lanny. I had a bit of a delusional 10 before the end, and so I tried my best with that, but I also tried to allow myself to mood read a bit and give myself a break in December. I also did a try a chapter video where I tried a chapter of 4 of these books, and yeah, that was a lot of fun as well. I have 10 books that I started during the year that I want to finish, and those are The Winners, like I mentioned, for book club, James, Mink River, Hours, Lanny, The End of Summer, The Other Side of Night, Pink Glass Houses, The Grandmothers, and White Cat, Black Dog. So some of these I've started on audiobook, and I want to have the physical copy instead because I didn't like the audiobook for whatever reason. The Grandmothers and White Cat, Black Dog are short story collections, and so I'm working my way through those. And then there are a couple that I have just started and not gotten any further in, and so yeah, I'm carrying those over to 2025. I have 8 books that were on my TBR at some point, but that I didn't start for whatever reason. Malibu Rising, River Spirit, While Justice Sleeps, Escape, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Homegoing, Divergent Mind, and The King's Witches. And so some of these are still on my shelf and I can pick them up whenever I want to. Huckleberry Finn, I don't think I'm gonna read. I wanted to read that before I read James, but I'm just not going to. Homegoing, I'm currently reading in January. Divergent Mind wasn't very inclusive, it turned out, so I decided to skip that. And The King's Witches was the next book by Kate Foster that I wanted to read. She wrote The Maiden that I really liked, and so I wanted to get her new book. I never got around to buying that. I'm waiting for the paperback. And I'm also on a witch hunt break, and this is the same story that was in The Burnings, so I still want to read it, but I might just wait a little bit. I had 7 books that I DNF'd. The first 2, on agoraphobia and Sure I'll Join Your Cult, was for Mental Health May, and those were complete opposites in terms of tone, but neither of them really worked for me. The Mercies and The Witching Tide both had witch hunts in them, so those were not for me for that reason. The Unfortunates, Intermezzo, and Sorrow and Bliss were all books that I wanted to read for the New November event, but they turned out not to be for me. In total, I finished 51 books in 2024. My goal was to finish 40 books, and so I'm very happy with that. And as you can see in the graph here, March and October were standout months for me, where I read 7 books. I think what this tells me is that when I allow myself some time and space to mood read, I'm having a better time and I'm getting through more books. And so yeah, that's definitely a takeaway for me. I read a total of 17,580 pages, plus an audiobook that was 4 hours long. That doesn't have a page count because it's only available on audiobook. So I read 47 full-length novels, 3 short stories, and that audiobook that's only 4 hours. So the short stories are going to drag down the average a little bit. So the average with the short stories is 346 pages per book, not including the audiobook that doesn't have any pages. If I remove the short stories and just do an average of the 47 full-length novels, that average is 401 pages per book. The shortest story I read was Galatea at 27 pages, and the longest book was Pachinko with 521 pages. And I read an average of 1,465 pages per month and 48 pages per day. So here's an overview of all of the books that I read in order of completion. And yeah, it would have been nice to have 52 books just to make this graphic complete. It's missing one spot at the end, which is a bit annoying. But anyways, these are all the books that I read in 2024. And these are the same books, just sorted by color because it's pretty and I wanted to, and so that's why. So let's move on to publication year and look at when their books I read were published. So this graph shows the years 1890 to 2030 and all of the books that I read from January to December. I only read 3 books that were published before 1990. That was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, 1984, and The Yellow Wallpaper. And then I read 4 books that were published in the 1990s, and those were Marina, I Who Have Never Known Men, Parable of the Sower, and Parable of the Talents. And then if we zoom in a little bit on the graph and only look at the years 2000 until 2024, we can see how the books are spread out during those years. And I read 7 books that were released in 2024, and those were Sociopath, The Mare, Bird Eye, Rewitched, The Answer Is No, Home Is Where the Lies Live, and One of Our Own. I read a total of 24 books that were published in 2021, 2022, and 2023, and 13 books that were published between the years of 2011 and 2020. But there are no books that I read that are published between the years 2000 and 2010, and I'm not really sure why that is. There's just a 10-year gap there that I'm not really sure why. And then this chart is just another way to look at how many books I read per decade. So I read 1 book that was published in 1890, 1920, and 1940. 4 books that were published in the 1990s, 12 books that were published in the 2010s, and 32 books that were published in the 2020s. I'm a little bit surprised that I read so many recent books, but I'm also not surprised. But I think 32 sounds like a high number to me. But yeah, that's fine. So let's move on to what genres I read. This pie chart shows an overview of all of the genres, and I'm of course going to go through all of them. The genres that I read the least from were romance, horror, humor, and nonfiction, but I really enjoyed all of the books that I read for those genres. Those were The No-Show, Marina, The Mother of All Problems, Sociopath, and The Wager. I have 2 separate slices for myth retellings and fantasy because I think that those are different, but they're also similar in a way. Those 2 combined make up the largest number with a total of 10 books with 5 in each. So these slices include Circe, Stone Blind, and Clytemnestra for myth retellings. And the fantasy books are the Prison Healer series, Rewitched, and One Dark Window. The slice that is the biggest on its own is contemporary fiction at 8 books total. And some of these could maybe go into literary fiction as well, which is a smaller slice. But I decided to put these in contemporary because, I don't know, the literary ones just are a little step above in terms of prose and themes and things like that. So the books that I've put in this category are, for instance, Stolen, Remarkably Bright Creatures, A Man Called Ove, Yellowface, and Bandit Queens. I have 5 historical fiction books, and those are Mrs. England, Pachinko, The Burnings, The Maiden, and The Mare. And then I have a pretty big slice for mixed/other books, and some of these are just mixed in terms of contemporary and historical, so they might have dual timelines and they're set in the present and in the past. And others, like The Yellow Wallpaper, is a classic and it's a short story, and I'm not going to make a separate slice for that, so that can also go in other. And then books like Piranesi, I wouldn't know which category to put it in, so it's just going to go in mixed other. And so yeah, I have 7 books in that category. Another big slice is science fiction with 7 books, which was a bit surprising to me because I didn't think that I read that much science fiction. But when I look at the books in this category, I also realized that they're not my favorites. And so that's why I wouldn't think that I would read so much science fiction, because I don't really like science fiction always. I do sometimes, but yeah. In this category we have books like This Is How You Lose the Time War, The Earth Seed Duology, The Center, 1984, and The Power. Then I have 3 books each in the mystery and thriller categories, and these are The Maidens, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, The Maid, Home Is Where the Lies Live, Little Rumors, and One of Our Own. None of these were standouts for me, so I'm gonna continue in 2025 to try some more popular ones and see what kind of thrillers and mysteries I like, because I enjoy that genre as a concept and like, you know, in TV shows and movies and things like that. So I would like to find some good books in those genres. These are just ones that I've kind of tried on a whim. I think my favorite of all of these is gonna be Little Rumors, which I've never heard anything about anywhere, so sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And then lastly, I have literary fiction, which I've only put 3 books in, and the books that I've put in here are Beartown and Us Against You. And that could just as easily have gone into contemporary fiction. I just feel like the writing in it is a little bit like a level up from the other books in contemporary fiction. And the same goes for Bird Eye. Like, all of these books are more like character focused and more focused on like doing something special with the writing. And so yeah, that's why I put those 3 in this category. I also decided to look for some themes in my reading and see if I could find some common threads or hidden messages of some kind. And I found 8 books that I read that had animals or creatures in them as like somewhat of an important aspect to the story. I read 2 books where the main character has a monster in their head, which is also like a character in the book. And then I read 5 books where grandmothers play an important part. I read 19 books that I would classify as dark. There are some other books that have dark themes in them, but they don't feel as dark. But these 19 books felt kind of dark. What I mean by dark is things like war, murder, violence, dystopia, and madness. And I read about 20 books that were on the lighter or more fun side of things. Like I said, some of these are maybe sad or have dark things happening in them, but like as a whole, they felt comforting or empowering or adventurous and were more of like a fun time to read than the darker ones. I read 17 books where imprisonment or confinement was a central aspect to the story. And so in these books, someone either was in an actual prison cell for some period of time, or they were confined to a room or an island or something along those lines. And yeah, these are all the books that I would classify as women's stories. So these books either have a female main character, or they are dealing with a feminist issue or have a feminist angle to whatever is happening in the book. And these are the books with a male main character, or where one of the main characters are male if there are multiple POVs. And these are all of the books that have some kind of diversity representation, so BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, disability or neurodivergence. And like that's all of the books with those aspects combined. I wish there were more books on this slide, but at least there are some, and that's better than nothing. And now I know what I need to improve on. In terms of audience, most of the books that I read were for adults, and 7 books were marketed as young adult books. I completed 2 series, and those were the Prison Healer series and the Earthseed duology. And then I have 3 ongoing series, and those are the Beartown series, which I'm hoping to finish very soon. I have the Sapmi trilogy, which starts with Stolen. And then I also started the Shepherd King duology with One Dark Window, and I'm going to read 2 Twisted Crowns this year. But the majority of the books that I read were standalones at 82%. 21 of the books that I read were group reads in one way or another. 17 of them were for the book club, and I'm including the winners in that because I read that during December as well, even though I didn't finish it. And then I had 4 buddy reads and 31 solo reads. Looking at it like this and seeing them all together, 17 books for a book club in 1 year is quite a lot, and this is only from June to December. That's a lot. A bit too much. In terms of format, I read 32 books in physical form, and 10 of these I also listened to on audiobook, either simultaneously while reading the physical book or alternating in between. In total, I read 26 books as audiobooks. 26 of the books that I read I have on my shelves in physical form. 25 I listened to on BookBeat, which is the audiobook subscription that I have. 6 of the books that I finished were from the library. And then I have 2 books that I read from NetGalley, one as an audiobook and one as an ebook. So moving on to my spending on books in 2024, I've done a bunch of book hauls on my channel, and most of them are used books. But I still did spend quite a bit of money on books in 2024, and yeah, that's something that I want to be mindful of in the coming year, because I didn't really pay much attention, to be honest. But now I've done the math and I've included all of the books that I have shown in a book haul during the year. So that includes the books that I purchased in December of 2023, but I showed in a video in February. So like, it's not that important, but just those are the books that I purchased and sort of read throughout the year. So in total, I bought 106 physical books this year for a total of $493. 78 of them were new books, and that makes out 26% of the books, but I paid $388 for those 28 books, and that makes up 79% of my spending on physical books. Whereas the 78 books that I bought used cost a total of $104. The average amount I spent per book was $4.60, which is pretty good. But if I do that average on just the new books, that comes out to $13.90 per book. Whereas for the used books, I only paid $1.33 per book. The cheapest book I bought cost 70 cents, and the most expensive one cost $33.10, and that's including shipping. So in average, I spent $41 per month on physical books. So did I read any of these books, you asked? Yes, I did. I read 28 books that I had purchased this year. So I read 26% of the books that I bought. 21 of them were new and 7 of them were used. I also have an audiobook subscription, which costs $203 per year, and that's for 100 hours per month. And I read 25 audiobooks on that app, so that comes out to an average of $8 per book. So adding all of that together, I spent $696 on books in total over the year on physical books and audiobooks combined, and that comes out to an average of $58 per month. That might sound like a little or a lot to you, but to me that sounds like a little bit too much. I don't mind it, I don't regret it, but it's just good to have the numbers in front of me so that I can make informed decisions going forward. My takeaways for next year are to read more of what I own. I have a lot of good books on my shelves already that I can choose from. I want to use BookBeat, which is my audiobook app, more, or reduce the number of hours that I pay for. I just thought the deal was a lot better for 100 hours. And some months I did listen to more than the lower level, but I think I'm going to try to lower that for a bit. I want to use the library more, and I also want to be a bit more mindful, especially when buying new books. I don't want to buy a bunch of new books just to try them. I want to buy new books that I know I love. I also wanted to test my rating and sort of compare it to the average ratings on Goodreads, just to see if I tend to rate books higher or lower than the average person. I have 1 book that I rated 1 star, 2 books that I rated 2 stars, 11 books that I rated 3 stars, and then 22 books that I rated 4 stars and 15 5 stars. And so overall, I think that looks like a pretty good reading year quality-wise. So I've made a note on what the average rating is for each of the books that I read on Goodreads, and then taken an average out of all of those, and that comes out to 4.08. And if I do the same for my rating, that comes out to 3.94. So that tells me I'm pretty close to the average, but maybe a little bit lower. And I think that's good, because that means I don't give out 5 stars just when they're not deserved, I found that very interesting. So out of the books that I read last year, the one that has the most ratings on Goodreads is 1984 by George Orwell. This one has almost 5 million ratings on there. And the one with the fewest ratings on Goodreads was The Mayor by Anchorage, Hampshire. That only has 45 ratings. The one with the highest average rating is The Mayor by Anchorage, Hampshire at 4.51. And the one with the lowest rating is The Center by Aisha Manasir Siddiqui at 3.40. But since The Mayor only has 45 ratings, the next one after that with the highest average was As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Sulfa Katu at 4.49, and that has about 75,000 ratings on Goodreads. So let's move on to the authors of the books that I read, and these are them. And if you think that they all look pretty much the same, I would have to agree with that. So I've read from 34 female authors and 8 male authors. And then there's one book with a collaboration between 2 authors. I've read from 33 authors that are white and only 9 that are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And that's very much too low for my liking. But yeah, I think it's good to have their pictures up like this because it makes it a lot more apparent. I don't typically divide people up into categories like this, but I just felt like I thought I read more diversely than I do, and so this division of people just made it a lot more clear. And so yeah, now I know where I stand and what I need to work on in the future. I also wanted to place everyone out on a world map. So on the first map here, I have put the authors where the books are set. I have a group of 5 authors up top where the book is set somewhere other than Earth, or where we don't know where the book is set. And then I have a few books set in the US and a lot of books set in the UK, some in Europe and some in Western Asia and some in East Asia. I have 1 dot in Africa, but I think that's the Power, and it just very briefly takes place in Nigeria and then it moves on from there, so that's not really, it doesn't really count. I have nothing in South America and nothing in Australia. The only one that's circling South America there is David Gran, because of the book The Wager, but those are British people and it's not set in South America. But it's, taking place at sea around there. So that's why he's out swimming in the ocean. So apart from the US and the UK, I read books set in Sweden, Spain, Germany, Greece. We have Syria, Iran, India, South Korea, and Japan. And even though I would like for this to be even more spread out across the map, it doesn't look too bad when I see it like this. But if I look at where the authors live, we have this map where everyone is just completely crowded into the US, a couple in Canada, and then everyone else are in the UK, apart from Lynette Noni in Australia and Toshikazu Kawaguchi in Japan. The red dots that I have are for where the authors are born. If I have that information, I haven't been digging too much, but just if it says in their bio on Goodreads and things like that. I think this is a very interesting map to look at. And, I would like for it to look a lot different when I do this for next year. In terms of diversity, this next slide is also a bit depressing. The author that I have read most from is Fredrik Backman, who I've read a total of 5 stories from, 1 standalone, 1 series of 3 books, and then 1 short story. And he is from Sweden, where I am from as well, and he's a very good author and I love his writing. So I'm not mad about that, but it's just very annoying that I read a majority of female authors, and the one that I've read most from is still a white man. The next 2 authors are 2 white women. So we have Madeline Miller and Lynette Noni. Lynette Noni is mostly on here because I read a series by her, which has 3 books in it. Madeline Miller wrote Circe, The Song of Achilles, and Galatea, which I've read. And those are 2 books and a short story, so maybe I actually read more from Lynette Noni, like in terms of pages, but I'm still counting Circe and The Song of Achilles and Galatea as like 3 separate books because they are separate. So I don't know, she still like comes up higher in the list because of that, because, you know, the Prison Healer series is just 1 series. I don't know. And then in 4th place we have Octavia E. Butler, which I read 2 books from, the Earthseed duology with Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. All of the other authors I only read 1 book from. Still, it's a bit depressing, and I would like for this list to look differently next year as well. And I don't mind reading, you know, a lot of books from Fredrik Backman, like I said, but it's just annoying. It's just annoying to have a white man in the top on this list, even though like the majority of the authors that I've read are women. Anyways, I just think it's interesting, and it's good to have like a fact check sometimes, and, you know, see things for what they are and not just what you think that they are, you know? So there's no point to statistics or analysis unless you have some takeaways from it. So my takeaways from all of these reading stats are 5 in total. So my first takeaway is that I'm pretty happy with the quantity, quality, and variety of my reading in 2024. I think 50 books in a year is very good, and I have a pretty high average rating, and so I enjoyed most of the books that I read, and I also read from a big variety of different genres, and so I'm very happy with that. I could have read a bit more nonfiction maybe, but you know, I'm still happy. And so for 2025, I think I'm going to aim for 52 books in a year, just to have that pretty graphic at the end. I think that if I aim for 50 pages a day, I could achieve that. My second takeaway is that I want more diversity in my reading, in all aspects, and so that's why I decided to create the diversity book bingo, and I think that's going to help me with that, and it's already like making it a little bit more top of mind for me when I pick what books to read. My third takeaway is that any kind of obligation or like sense of obligation is making my reading slower and less fun. Even though I think the book club and the buddy reads and everything is fun, it does give me a sense of obligation and like having to finish books. And even if I'm enjoying the book, the sense of obligation makes the experience less enjoyable for me. And so my takeaway for 2025 is to have less obligations. Takeaway number 4 is that I have pretty reliable instincts, like in terms of my own taste and which books I think I will enjoy. Most of the books that I haven't enjoyed, I've kind of had a feeling beforehand that I might not enjoy them that much, or that they might not be the highest quality of writing or whatever. And the ones that I have been very excited about and like have thought like this is a book for me, they have kind of turned out to be that. So yeah, I'm going to try to follow my own interests and really try to feel like check with myself and see, do I really feel excited about this book? And if so, then I can go ahead and read it. And if I don't, maybe I, don't need to. Takeaway number 5 has to do with my spending, and I've already mentioned this, but I want to be a bit more mindful, especially when buying new books and making sure that I only spend that much money on a book that I know I love. And I want to reassess my audiobook subscription and see what level suits me. And I want to use my library a lot more because I've started to in 2024, and they have a lot of books, and I have suggested purchasing books, and they have purchased a couple of books already that I have suggested, and so I'm just going to use my library a lot more in 2025, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So that's my 2024 wrapped. I hope you enjoyed all of the statistics and the graphics and all of that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Oh my god, I haven't even gotten to genre yet, and I've been talking for 40 minutes. Okay.